That the acceptance of women was done not as robustly or vigorously or with as much generosity as perhaps was appropriate. They took the approach, as many male institutions do, that all right, we'll let a few women in, these special girls, but they're going to be like us. They're going to fit into our institutions. And that's essentially how integration has happened around the world for women. In business, it's the same. You are meant to fit into the male structure. You work in the same way that men work. You will operate according to those norms. So it was at Yale. So we arrived, and there were still only pictures of great men, white men, on the walls all around the institution. It was fabulous. It is a fabulous place, gorgeous, stunning. But certainly, it was something that was quite old and not really welcoming to us. One of the things that had come about was something called Title IX, which is part of the 1964 Civil Rights laws in the United States. And Title IX, when I came of age, was interpreted to give women access to equal athletic opportunities to men. Now, up until that time, when I got into Yale, what I did athletically was I carried picket signs and protest to let women have access to full sports. But at that point, women didn't play sports. But probably the single most important law at that time for women was that it taught a whole generation of women that we have bodies and they're just as good as the men's, and we can actually be sportswomen. And it opened up that whole opportunity in a way of thinking that was so different to my mother and all previous generations. I think before I die, how that law will be interpreted is that no longer will there be sex-defined sports, because there really is no reason to have tennis be men's tennis, women's tennis, men's swimming, women's swimming. It should be on the basis of capacity. If you have a body that works and you can get accepted, male or female, you should play the sport. And if you don't play the sport. Some might say that women aren't going to be able to play a lot of sports under that analysis. I don't think that's true. I think we can see at the Olympics that women's sport capacity is as good as men's, and we'll be playing as much sport as we want to play. So I think those will change. We will no longer have gender-defined sports, I hope, by the time that my life is over, and that it's going to be equal access on capacity, only on capacity. So I tried out for the swim team, which had just opened for women. It was under Title IX. They needed to allow sports for women, or the institution was in trouble. And on the team, the first day, the women came together, and it was sort of a motley crew of women. We had no swimming costumes that they gave us. There was no special bus. There were no special foods. And we had to swim from 5 to 7 in the morning. The men got to swim in the pool from 7 until 9. They got to go off and have a fine breakfast. Nobody made us breakfast. At nighttime, we had to swim during the dinner hour from 5 to 7, so we missed dinner. And the men then the evenings had a steak dinner, which was considered a healthy option for men. And they had those with a glass of wine and a beer. We had none of those things. And then these great buses would come and take the men off to games. But we had little cars that we could borrow, and kind of borrow your car, and we'd go in that way. So I organized a protest, and the protest was all the women put towels around their naked bodies. We called a press conference, and those were the days when there were these old photography cameras, click, 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 there were big bulbs. And in front of, we faced the wall, we dropped our towels, our naked bodies said Title IX, we need suits. And of course there are some pictures of this, which I haven't, okay, so can we go down some more on this? So, and some more, and some more. Okay, so there we are. So there's me, doing a protest so that we could get swimsuits. The next day we had swimsuits, and gradually we got. So we learned that to get legal change, humor was a good thing to do, to joke, to try and make light of it, to try and get equality. So that's Yale then. But then other things started happening, and there was something called date rape. And one day I called the Yale police station to report the strangulation and rape of of a young woman, and I called it that it had been a date rape, that they knew each other. And the police officer who took the call laughed and said, "You must be joking. She must have asked for it. It's not a rape." So that brought us to mind that we had a big problem on there. Okay, so there you go. That was the date, and this is by Dr. Calvin Hirsch, who is today a leading gerontologist at the University of California in their Davis campus. So he operates as usual, but the woman who was raped, of course, still suffers, as we hear the tales so often today in the press. So with date rape, on that's fine. What we realized is that there was no mechanism, there was no solution. And that meant that there was also no avenues for sexual harassment. What happened if you were sexually harassed, if you were date raped, if you were assaulted? Nobody wanted to know. You could call the police, and I'm sure probably most women who did call, if they were so brave to do so, there was no dedicated staff or police or women police officers. There were Italian men who would laugh and say, "You caused it, it's your fault." So by the time that I was leaving Yale, I was asked to do a report to the Yale Corporation, which is the governing body on Yale, on the status of women in the institution. Because by the time I graduated 4 years later, then there were 10 years of coeducation at Yale. And what became apparent as I took people's stories, women's stories, is that a lot of women were being sexually harassed, and they were also having sex with faculty because they were trying to get ahead and the faculty was putting moves on them. So I went to Yale to try and get organized a central data place so people could complain in one place. Because Yale, as you may know, had 12 residential colleges. So you could live in one of those 12 places, and if you reported sexual harassment or a rape, it stayed in your local college. It didn't go to the central university. So a professor might be sexually harassing a number of different women, but it only got reported in your college. So you didn't know that you may have had a serial predator, as we had many at Yale. Yale said that it had no interest in doing anything about it, and finally, the day that I was graduating, the secretary of the university called me up and said that Yale was going to defend the faculty members who were raping students, and that I was going to be arrested and brought up on defamation charges for making these allegations. Now, as a lawyer, I will tell you, you can't go to jail on defamation. It's a civil case. But it was Yale showing that it could play dirty, and it was going to try and really frighten us, that it wanted us to go away. It happened to be around this time that a man that I was dating was working for Time magazine, and he was visited by somebody from larger Time, from South Africa, who was there on a trip, and that man had lunch with the head of public information at Yale. And Yale said to him, "There's this woman, Olivarius. You may not know her, but she's a lesbian." In those days, of course, being called a lesbian was not being called something with kindness. It was a put down. And they said, also, she's failing out of Yale. So, when I was told this by the man who is now my husband, of course, he was quite surprised to get this report that I was a lesbian. And then I won a Rhodes Marshall Scholarship, graduated at the top of my class at Yale. So it was for me a coming of age that a noble institution like Yale University, which I revered, because I came from no place. And by the time I got to Yale, it really represented excellence of academic life. It was the academy, the best of the academy. People thought it was the best university at that time in the world, certainly candidating to be so. And here, they were prepared to lie about a student. They didn't want to do social change. They were going to defend rapists and threaten us. So, that being said, I organized with a group of three other women and a male professor, and we went to the Yale Law School and we organized a new legal theory called sexual harassment. We said it was covered under the same Title IX law that gave us sports equality, and that we filed the first suit in the United States in education, and we said that if women are forced to have sex when they're students, with professors, with faculty, then they're not getting an equal education. And the law in the United States promises both sexes an equal education. And We weren't getting it. So here's the New York Times headline, and it was considered a scandal. It was an outrage. When we filed suit, I can't tell you the kind of anger it triggered. You know, I was somewhat innocent, 21-year-old at the time. I, was going off to England. I won a Rhodes Scholarship. I was top of my class at Yale, and I was getting death threats. This is before internet, before trolling. Death threats, people sent feces, actual, shit in boxes to my mailboxes. I had these letters like you see in these murder mysteries where they cut out letters and say, they're going to kill you, and terrible things were sent. All because we were trying to get a central system so that men who sexually harassed or raped women could be entered into that system, and Yale could do something about it. The way I look at the world, I would think any good person would think that's a good idea. What good man or woman would want to have rapists, assaulters, harassers walking around the community? Because every good man has got maybe a wife, certainly daughters, or children, a sister, a mother. Certainly they know women, so why would they want to put their women at risk? It made no sense to me. We brought this case forward, and the case ultimately was mooted out of court, but it was the first case that alleged this legal theory, and as you know, it has become law throughout the land, it has become law in Europe. It's the predicate case. I will say, at the time, I was vilified, but now, I'm one of Yale's stars. Yale has come back to claim me as one of its heroes. So for those of you who are thinking about fighting, it's good to fight. It may take a little hardship for a while, but if you stick to it, you have a real shot at actually making a difference and becoming somebody, changing the world, and you become a hero. And it's interesting to me how that really has changed. Now, there's that lawsuit. So where are we today? Where have things happened? Let's go to the next slide. So in 50% of women, we know this from, that's been published in the British press, but 50% of British women have been harassed at work or at universities. Next, please. We know that 2 out of 3 British girls have been sexually harassed in public. Next, please. We know that 1 out of 3 women worldwide have experienced either physical or sexual violence. And we know that 1 out of 3 women who attend U.S. or British universities, 1 out of 3, are going to be sexually assaulted or raped. 1 out of 3. Now let's assume that that study has been replicated a few times. Let's just say it's wrong. Let's let the conservatives say, you didn't do it right. The methodology is wrong. But even if it's 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6, those are huge numbers. Huge. Why is that acceptable under any analysis? But these are the numbers that are coming by. So I want to know, how come there's not a revolution in the streets? How come this hall is not filled with thousands of people? How come this last report, what's going on, is allowed to happen? How come Donald Trump can stay in the White House as a sexual harasser himself? And Berlusconi is coming back again. How could this be? Okay, so what have we done in terms of law now? So that was the history of how we got sexual harassment law established. So what does it look like today? So today I bring a lot of cases against universities because universities are some of the hardest institutions to get to do the right thing. I used to sue, and still do, the Catholic Church for their pedophile priests. And inevitably, I'd get a win in court, and then the bishop or the cardinal would come to me and say, well, Father Joe, he may have caused damage to 100 boys, but we didn't really know he was doing it, and he said he was sorry. And they're always concerned about the violence, the people who do the violence, not about the victims who have been hurt. And they say, we're the Catholic Church, and we really shouldn't have to pay any money because we're a charity. And I always say, no, you're going to pay me, because that's the only way we're going to stop this problem. And so we have taken off billions of dollars from the Catholic Church and given it to victims where it should go, so they can try to heal their lives. But now I sue universities, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Oxford, Cambridge, the best and the worst of universities. And they are even worse than the churches, because they have an intellectual elitism Catholic Church thinks they're morally superior, that they're close to God. Well, the universities think somehow they're even above that because their grades are so much better than everybody else's, that somehow they have a sacred position. They're really special. So getting them to do the right thing is really tough. We have a case now against the University of Rochester. Florian Jaeger is a professor who was brought up as a German man, an only child. He has his view that he's very special. He dates a lot of students, both his graduate students and his undergraduate students. He socializes with them. He talks about them having sex. He talks about going out to have naked hot tub parties with them. He fraternizes in a way that is very intimate. And 16 women came to us and said that their academic lives were ruined, destroyed, that they left the academy because of Florian Jaeger. We went to the university, we tried to get this sorted, and they didn't care. They exonerated him. So we have that case. Now, one of the things that I'd like to talk about, because it's in here on these posters, you see the same theme. I thought of the 16 women who came to talk about their careers being destroyed. Many of them had sexual intercourse with this man. Now this man, you just look at him. I don't know what everybody's idea of a hot guy is and what this man appeals to, but we find a lot of the men in academic life who are accused of sexual harassment are not particularly attractive, I think, by a nominal view. Look at them at bar. If you didn't know who they were, and say, I don't think so. That's not such a great thing. So anyway, so we've sued him and the university, and they have done nothing. They've hired a law firm, there's no business in the States, law firms, not ours, that you can hire, and they paid a law firm $4.5 million to exonerate the university, essentially. So we're in federal court suing him. But the thing that comes out strongly is that the notion of consent. These women who had sexual intercourse with this man, I am surprised that they don't look at it that it was forced, because when you have a power differential, of course, we're arguing that you cannot give consent. It's like if you're drunk, you cannot consent. So if you have sexual relations when you're drunk, that's forced intercourse. And if you're having sexual relations with someone who controls your life, because he's writing your references and his friends are writing references for you, is that a consensual sexual event? And we would say, and we're arguing for it, that may not be. That may be more like a rape than it is a consensual act. So those are the issues that we're fighting there.
So you're 5 minutes now.
Okay. So we're also fighting, I bring this up with Harvey Weinstein, because Harvey Weinstein, we have 122 women who are movie stars in the movie business who now allege that they've been raped by Harvey Weinstein. None of them called it rape for, over 30 years that he's been doing this. So the notion of consent and what is consensual is a big issue in sexual harassment law. Okay, so let me leave all this, and that's where we are. So what can we do? How do we cure this problem? There are a couple of major things we can do. Why don't we leave that? If we want to change sexual harassment, ultimately, the only way on a macro level that we're going to get rid of sexual harassment is if you have equality of men and women in the home, where women are not the primary caregivers for children, taking care of their homes, that there's equality there. If you have equality at work, where women are earning the same incomes and have the same job opportunities as men, then you'll have a chance to have peaceful life, mutual coexistence, and gender violence will diminish. That's your macro solution to sexual harassment. But I leave you with a message on the immediate basis. What can we do? There are a couple of things that I would say have to happen if we're going to stop sexual harassment in universities. One is financial sanctions to the universities. Universities have a problem. They have to make sure they provide opportunity for these harassers to be brought to trial. They have to be dealt with. They can't be ignored. If the schools ignore them, then there should be financial sanctions at the end for doing that. If institutions have to pay money, they will change pretty rapidly. That's the way you get these guys. And the other thing you have to do is have an outright ban on sexual relations in the academy between people who are lower down, women who are just coming up the system, and established professors. You cannot have this power imbalance and let people who oversee your work have control over your body. If people have those sexual relations, then there have to be rules against it, and the rules have to be enforced. So last I leave you with, there's this notion of the special man, the really talented man, the Nobel Prize winner. There's a cardiologist at Yale who just was given a chair. He's this Dr. Simons. He's a chap who was found to be a sexual harasser 5 years ago. It has prompted at Yale, my alma mater, a petition where 1,000 medical people have said, why is he eligible? He's not that smart. If he misbehaves, we don't care. Even if he's won a Nobel Prize, he shouldn't get a chair. You can't promote these guys. So you have to really have eyes on this, the sense of that a guy is so important, he's just such a good, powerful guy who should be forgiven for transgressions. That's got to go. No special deals, no special men. Everybody should be held to justice. And we have to stand up strong, use our voices, and make sure we rally for that. So that's what I'll leave you with. Thank you.